Good afternoon. On behalf of the CJD International Support Alliance, my co-chairman Suzanne Salvins and I want to offer our most sincere thank you to Benjamin Schur, Dr. John Langefeld, the Prion 2012 Organizing Committee, and to all of you for allowing us to take a few minutes during this impressive scientific conference to speak on behalf of the many affected patients and families around the globe, including those living with risk. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the members of the Alliance who are in attendance here at Prion 2012. Please stand for a second when I say your name. Alice Annan, Israel. Roberto Borges, Italy. David Ralston, Australia. Lori Nussbaum, US. J.B. Matthew, France. And it gives us great pleasure to introduce our newest members, the leaders of the recently formed Prion Disease Support Organization in Germany, Jens Becker and Bridget Tucking. Also, Mrs. Jeanette Gorian, who is here to represent a family organization in France. The Alliance was formed 6 years ago by leaders of organizations from 4 countries. Today, we have 9 countries represented. As a group, we are concerned about food and blood safety, clinical trials, drug studies, promising research developments, and the discovery of new cases of prion diseases, both human and animal. We support each other's causes, share information, issue joint press releases, and discuss matters of international concern with our individual members and our boards of directors. We try to always act as a rational watchdog coalition, speaking out with concern on behalf of affected patients, families, and those at risk around the world, always remaining free from personal or political bias or prejudice, and we work together to effect change. We serve as a positive example of the words of Voltaire, who wrote, "No single snowflake is ever responsible for an avalanche." In our talk in Montreal last May, we attempted to describe the devastation and damage this tragic category of diseases brings to patients and families by using the analogy of a train wreck. In reality, once faced with a prion disease diagnosis, there is no way possible to describe the limits to which the human spirit will be tested. The rapid downward spiral defies understanding, and yet some of our families told you their stories and you did understand. This year, once again, we've decided to bring you a glimpse into our world. And although Suzanne and I are listed in the program as presenters, this time slot really belongs to those we represent. Suffering and loss are the common threads in each of the very brief stories you will soon hear. Many, like me, heard the words of this difficult to pronounce disease for the first time while watching in horror as a loved one daily lost pieces of his humanity. We will first introduce a few family members who have been affected by sporadic CJD.
My name is Marcia Gaddis. In 2007, my oldest daughter, Megan, who was 25 years old, was diagnosed with sporadic CJD. She was bright, well-educated, and beautiful, poised for a life of greatness in teaching and service to others. For 16 months between the onset of her symptoms and her death, Megan bore up with startling grace while the rest of us struggled to find meaning.
My name's Amy, and in 2006 I just had my second baby when my mum started to get really sick. It began with tingling in her legs and soon escalated to chronic pain and loss of function, which quickly saw her deteriorate from dancing in the kitchen to suddenly using crutches, then being in a wheelchair, and finally bedridden within a matter of months. She also changed as a person. She became fearful, submissive. All the tests came back negative, so the verdict was depression. By the time she was finally diagnosed with CJD, she was already unresponsive. She died 5 days later, having missed out on any validation, any dignity in her treatment, and the chance to say goodbye while she still could.
My name is Rafael. I knew Valeria in July 2003. She was my girlfriend for 2 years. When Valeria was 42, was diagnosed with sporadic CJD. She was a sensitive soul, a rare person for me, vanishing, well-being week after week, was the most painful experience in my life. I was angry and faced the weakness of human nature without an explanation.
Some families will face this nightmare more than once in a generation.
My name is Alice and I'm from Israel. My father died of CJD in 1986 at the age of 49 years old, and we were told at the time it could have been from contaminated beef. I was the eighth of a 9-children family. It was very difficult to see our father, a strong and energetic person, become demented, lacking balance, fading in a very humiliating way, lose consciousness and eventually die. At the age of 35, I became pregnant with my third child. I mentioned that my father had died of CJD. I was shocked when the doctor explained to me that this disease could be genetic. Eventually, I was told that both my baby and I carrying the defective gene. My husband and I were asked if we wanted to give up the embryo, but in my mind, I imagined my mother pregnant with me and being asked the same question. I had the right to exist, and so did my baby.
My name is Dina Simpson. I lost my mother to familial CJD in 1998. Our family has lost 12 family members spanning 5 generations. Unfortunately, that number will increase to 13 very shortly, as my brother is in active disease. I can honestly tell you that looking at this monster in the eye is no easier the second, third, or fourth time around. It is equally horrific. There are more to come unless a treatment or cure is found. It is never over for family members dealing with familial CJD. As we face our own mortality, there are a plethora of issues that we have to deal with after a loss, including whether or not to get tested. If tested, do we share our results with family or with healthcare providers? Awareness is a huge issue in the healthcare community, and we have been denied care based on fear instead of knowledge.
My name is Josephine. I'm from a familial CJD family and to date have lost 7 family members. My father passed away very quickly from CJD. He was a healthy 68-year-old, so it was a shock to see him deteriorate so fast. My brother passed away at 58, also very rapidly. I have since been tested positive for the gene for familial CJD and had to face a very difficult decision as to whether to tell my children and put this burden on them. At times it's a challenge living with this knowledge that I have no control over, but I do have control over how I face this challenge and use this knowledge to make the very best of my life and enjoy every precious moment.
My name is Amanda, and Gerstmann-Straussler-Schenker disease has been traced back through 5 generations of my family, with the most recent death being my father's, Dr. Luke Baxley, in April of 2010. He was diagnosed with GSS in 2004, and for 6 years he slowly and painfully deteriorated before dying at the age of 58. Watching my father have his life stolen from him in such a cruel way was absolutely heartbreaking. Since GSS is hereditary, I knew there was a 50% chance that I could have inherited the mutation, and for me, living with the unknown was far worse than living with the known. So I decided to get tested and was diagnosed in 2009 as having the same genetic mutation as my father. My father's fate was now my own.
Some have had to deal with the knowledge that their loved one acquired this disease through iatrogenic exposure.
My name is Roger Tompkins. My youngest daughter Claire died in April 1998, aged 24, following her 2-year battle with variant CJD. The months of misdiagnosis and inappropriate psychiatric treatment, including electroconvulsive treatment, left our family devastated. The overwhelming irony of Claire's case was she had been a strict vegetarian for over 11 years prior to her illness.
My son Jean-Philippe was the most handsome boy you can think of. Blonde with green eyes, witty, sweetheart, a dream made true. In 1993, at the age of 19, after 18 months of agony, he died of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. The reason is sad. Jean-Philippe had been treated with human growth hormones in the 80s, 3 times a week of painful injections. And because of negligent preparation procedures, he was eventually contaminated by CJD agent like 119 other young people.
My name is Judy Kenny. In October 2003, my husband Derek died aged 69 after a devastating 14 months. At first his mobility, then his mind was robbed from him, and I lost the man I knew and loved. Derek had died from variant CJD that he had contracted from a blood transfusion. He received this in 1996 whilst undergoing a prostatectomy for cancer, which was supposed to save his life. I can't describe the devastation I felt at this news. Derek was the first person to have died from contaminated blood.
And some will live their lives fearing that the next time they misplace car keys or forget an item on their grocery list, they are experiencing the beginning symptoms of the Prion disease they were exposed to, either through genetics, fertility or hormone injections, or contaminated transplants.
Around the world, hundreds of people also live with the knowledge that they are at increased risk of developing CJD. Those who have received human fertility hormones for infertility or short stature, Duramater grafts, and others who have been notified of risk following blood or surgery lookbacks. Being at risk myself, I understand how this has affected so many lives and families. Around the world, hundreds of people also live with the knowledge that they are at increased risk of developing CJD. Those who have received human pituitary hormones for fertility or short stature, Duramater grafts, or others who have been notified of risk following blood or surgery lookbacks. Being at risk myself, I understand how this has affected so many lives and families.
The news that I was at increased risk of developing a rare and fatal disease for which there was no test and no cure changed my life. With my family's interests at heart, I put my career on hold, assumed a much larger role in the home, and supported my wife as she went back to university to better prepare herself to support our family if the worst case eventuated and I was no longer around. My parents, who thought they were doing the right thing at the time when they gave consent for me to be treated for short stature with human growth hormone, were very worried and felt guilty knowing that I was at risk of developing such a devastating disease.
We cannot remove the guilt of the parents who consented to human growth hormone therapy for their children, or change a history of suicides, broken marriages, anxiety, disgrace and despair. Those of us affected know intimately what living with the risk of CJD means. Although the years have passed, and hopefully for most the risk is diminishing, this does not stop even today the discrimination and delays that we often face when accessing healthcare. Being at risk of CJD is like living the life of a leper. Yet today, even with research indicating that urine-derived products may pose a risk of transmitting CJD, debate continues for their use. One more life at risk is one too many.
I know I speak for all of my alliance partners when I say that for the majority of those we represent, sometimes healing can only be accomplished by moving as far away as possible from the painful memories left after experiencing such a devastating loss, or of having to face the terrible possibility of becoming symptomatic in the future. After all, we can't always control what happens in our lives, but we can control how we go forward. There are, however, some family members who are willing and able to use their experience to reach out and help others facing the same dark journey. As Robert Brialt, a U.S. freelance journalist, so beautifully put it, sometimes in tragedy, we find our life's purpose. The eye sheds a tear to find its focus.
Derek had left me so many different things that he had made, not least numerous short stories. I decided to edit these, not a small task, and have them printed, to give copies to family members and friends. I felt this helped me come to terms with my loss.
I began to find strength in writing out my pain and began publishing an online journal that went beyond Megan's failing health to chronicle our thorny path from suffering and loss to deeper faith. Those journals became the book When God Comes Near, published in 2010.
I found relief in writing my pains, my thoughts, my experience. At the end, I collected them in a book titled, To You, a Part of Me.
After Mum died, I lay in bed at night unable to sleep because I felt I'd let her down. I hadn't given her a dignified death, and the look of fear and pain on her face was imprinted in my brain. Being a writer, the only thing I felt I could do to make it up to Mum was to tell the world how much we loved her and how badly she'd been treated. So I wrote an article for a news magazine, and the response was overwhelming. I was inundated with letters from other family members who finally found someone who recognised their story, and I was finally able to sleep again.
I have had the privilege to speak at conferences, provide phone and in-person support to patients and families, educate and bring awareness to clinicians and other members of the care team across the care continuum, advocate for patients and families affected by CJD, and identify physician champions willing to be educated on CJD.
I was asked to make the opening statement at the BSc Public Inquiry in 1998 to demonstrate to the inquiry panel and the assembled media the unbelievable and unique facts about variant CJD in young people.
Knowing I had inherited the gene for GSS forced my husband and I to make some tough decisions, one of which was whether or not to have kids. How could we bring a child into this world and risk them also having the mutation? The solution for us was in vitro fertilization with pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, and after education on the process, we proceeded. We were blessed with our twins, Ava and Cole, who we know, with 99% certainty, do not have the mutation. I have since become passionate about educating those with or at risk of having an inheritable prion disease, about IVF with PGD as a reproductive option. But I can't allow this terrible disease to continue to kill future generations of my family. It may kill me, but I will not allow GSS to kill my children, or my children's children. As far as I'm concerned, for my family, this monster of a disease ends with me.
I have held a dinner which was a great success, and I plan on organising more events. This is a great way to raise much needed funds for research, link families for mutual support, and help create more awareness and a better understanding of this terrible disease.
Daffodils, the brightest sign of springtime hope, were a favorite flower of my daughter Megan. In memory of her, my garden club in Atlanta began to sell and plant daffodils in the fall of 2008, sending the proceeds to the CJD Foundation for research and family support. The project became known as the Daffodil Dance, and the neighborhood now flourishes with over 12,000 bulbs planted throughout our community. Daffodils dressed in hope for a cure for this dreaded disease dance through springtime, bringing sunshine and hope for all of us.
The story also brought me into contact with the Australian CJD Support Group Network, and with their help my sisters and I were able to host a fundraiser that raised enough money to support a research student in Prion disease at the University of Melbourne. We needed to do something that might prevent other families from going through what we had.
I could not remain indifferent to my fate. I have established an association in Israel to promote the treatment and acknowledge this disease. I give information and support to families of patients. In Israel, there is a very poor awareness, and those facing this for the first time feel stigma, shame, and denial. The strain on the family is hard to deal with, as there is no cure and no prevention. We live in an existential and anxiety in everyday life, and it's very difficult.
As the anger I had felt at losing him to this man-made disease began to abate, I was asked if I would like to join the UK CJD Support Network Committee. I agreed, and now feel great satisfaction in being part of an organisation that is able to help sufferers, families and carers, and advise professionals who come into contact with all forms of this dreadful disease.
As a tribute to their children, some parents have created an association to help the families newly affected to cope with the situation. The only positive aspect we could find is the very strong links of friendship and mutual help we have created with the other members of the association. Our intention is now to continue and to extend our support to the persons suffering of other form of CJD, while at the same time trying to help the 860 young adults who have received potentially contaminated growth hormones in the 80s and who fortunately did not develop Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. We call them the survivors, and we love them as a continuation of our beloved children.
Family members of familial CJD are forced to take on many roles simply due to the nature of the disease, including the role of caregiver, historian, advocate, and educator. Then some of us decide to go a step further. When my mom was dying of CJD, we experienced several roadblocks due to the lack of awareness and the stigma associated with CJD. Following her death, I decided to take action, with the hope that other families would not have to go through these difficulties. So I started the CJD Insight organization, which was an avenue to provide accurate, up-to-date information about CJD with a specific focus on familial CJD.
When the Australian CJD support group restructured and expanded its role in 2004, from just supporting people who were at risk of CJD through hormone treatments to providing support for Australians affected by all types of CJD, I was invited to join the management committee, and I'm very proud of the network that we have become.
I met young people during a family conference in Milan, and I decided to help them in web communication, offering my time to keep the site updated. I believe that communication can be a medicine for who that are involved in such deep experience. The knowledge about the CJD, the symptom, and the medical research information must be easily available. Also, the experience of other people is the great treasure we only have concerning the caregiver role in the sickness.
I have now joined the committee of the Australian CJD Support Group Network, as I wanted to give something back to the network and also be able to help others who may need to talk to someone who understands what they are dealing with, especially other familial CJD family members.
The shock and strain of Claire's illness had a fatal effect on my wife, as she contracted ovarian cancer during the period of Claire's illness and sadly died 6 weeks after Claire. 14 years on, having met and married Sarah, who lost her husband in 1997 to sporadic CJD, together we are trustee and committee members of the CJD Support Network, and I am a trustee of the Variant CJD Compensation Trust, set up by the British Government in 2001 to compensate victims and their families. CJD has changed our lives forever.
Although there are no easy ways to mend the broken pieces of our hearts, to us, these family members exemplify the Japanese belief that when a beautiful object is broken, you can minimize the damage by filling the cracks with gold. And you, our researchers, embody this sentiment as well. To us, the non-scientists, your hard work and daily dedication to unlocking the mysteries of prion diseases truly minimizes the damage and helps to fill the cracks of our broken hearts and souls with golden hope. Thank you.